should be, sorry, this is not it. It should be in here. So let me put this. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me look for, how was it called? It was ROI groups, I think. Yeah. So when you define your ROI second level analysis, the ROI config file, remember that you had this field that it was ROI labels where you specify the actual subset of ROIs. You don't care about all of the ROIs that have been defined.
Alfonso?
Sure.
Sorry, can you zoom in?
Oh, right. Let me see. I can zoom in this way. Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. Sorry. So these are the options that go into the second level. Let me go up here. And this is in the manual for the FL stuff. This is the second level ROI sub portion. In there, you have an example config file information, and this is where it lists all of the fields that you can enter, specify within those config files. And within those config files, you typically specify the ROIs, which is just the actual files that characterize your ROIs. And then you can, the second thing that you typically do is specify ROI labels. Is you have an atlas that contains a lot of regions and you just care about a few of them for your second level analysis. You specify the actual labels of the subset of regions that you care about in here. And now you also have, remember that we talked about how to actually enter that information into the grouping information, and we discussed having like an ampersand or a plus or something, and I wasn't totally happy. I used an alternative version of specifying this information because I didn't want to constrain the ROI names to actually have like forbidden characters and things like that, because that will have like back compatibility issues. In any way, the option, the way to specify now groups of ROIs is by you have another field that is called ROI groups, and then you can specify there which ROIs among the ones that you listed or among the ones that are in the Atlas file do you want to be treated together. So if you want 3 ROIs to be treated together, you just enter ROI groups and then the list the 3 ROIs, and those will be grouped together. And if you want to define multiple groups, all you have to do is basically enter the name of the new group and then the list of the ROIs that go within that group, and then the name of the second group and the list of ROIs that go into the second group, and so on. So something like this, like group, you enter group 1, ROI 1, ROI 2, group 2, ROI 3, ROI 4, ROI 5. This assumes that there are some labels that correspond to ROI 1, ROI 2, ROI 3, up to 5, and this will create 2 groups by joining the first 2 ROIs and the last 3 ROIs. And the way that the software does know whether something that you specify is a group name or an ROI name is that anything, group names cannot be, basically, they cannot exist. You have to make up a new name, and it will detect that this name is not within the list of names in your Atlas file, and it will assume that it's the new grouping name. While these things are things that must actually exist. Those must be ROIs that have been defined in your Atlas file or in your labels list. Does that make sense?
Can we do an example?
Sure, we can do it actually. Do you have some data for second level analysis? I haven't, this is again one of those things that I have implemented but haven't yet tested. So actually, if you have a second level ROI,
we could just use my data set as an example and just maybe like SMA, pre-SMA, just something quick that we could.
Excellent, sounds great. So do you have can you share your window? Do you have a VNC session on yours?
Starting one now.
Okay.
FYI, as he pulls that up, I just started running the second level analysis, just the second level analysis for the individual subjects processed in the free server pipeline.
Right.
I'm getting an error using SPM check orientation.
That shouldn't happen. Let me check. Why is it? That shouldn't happen at all. Could you copy and paste or tell me the lines, the line where it calls SPM_SPM?
Yes, 323.
And that should be within if lab 17 run results or something like that?
Yeah. Oh, I see. Here, I can send this to you also.
Oh, no, that should be within con module GLM, right?
GLM line 197.
197.
Calls SPM_SPM.
That's weird. Could you do dbstop? Could you type dbstop if error and then run it again? And when it stops, type the second level analysis as if it was a single word and tell me what number does it tell you there.
Got it.
Sorry for the debugging online.
So db stop, one word, and then if error, two different words, or?
Right, db stop space if space error, and that basically is like a debugging.
Oh, nice. Okay, so now you
thing that whenever produces an error will stop.
and now I type the second level.
And now go type. You are probably within SPM something, right? So do db up until you are in the con module GLM. So type db up as a single word until it says that you are within con module GLM.
Okay, db up. Con module GLM.
Okay, and now type a second level analysis as a single word. That should be a variable that exists there. And it should give you a number.
Any capitals? Second level.
No, it's all a single word.
Second level analysis.
That should be a 3. And if it's not, we'll debug why that is the case.
Do you want to share? Yeah, I just have to connect it to them. Yeah, let me connect to Zoom.
Oh, right. If you can share your screen, perhaps I can debug in case.
Yeah.
That's actually really good.
All right, I'm going to share my screen and then Alfonso can take over. Okay.
Oh, okay, this is the.
So we could just do like maybe surface-based pipeline, combine just any two ROIs. I just suggested SMA, pre-SMA, but just to
Right.
kind of model how we do this.
Okay, so let me get request control for a second.
That's the problem with this room.
Okay, so let's say which analysis makes sense. Oops. Okay, so this analysis is, this will be fine. Let's look at this file then. Let me just, okay, so we are going to try to just quickly check rerunning that analysis, but where are we now? Oh, we are in the proper file. Fantastic. So let's see, paste. Oh,
we probably want to do one on the surface, right? Or I guess it doesn't matter.
I think that's
this.
Doesn't matter, yeah.
What am I doing here? Let me see. Shouldn't be. It should be like an ROI something. Yeah. Yes. So I just want to. Do you want to try this one, or do you want to do some other analysis? It's just just to test whether it actually works or not, and to show you how to actually type it. So you have you don't have ROI labels. Do you have an example where you have ROI labels, so I don't have to dig up the actual names of those regions? Oh well, it's going to use. You're not given. These are just ones and zeros, right? So it doesn't have any labels.
Yeah, it's
well,
not an atlas.
So I could just combine them, these two then. Okay, so let's say we want to combine these to a single one. So you could do something like this. You could say groups and then give it a new name if you want. ROI, I don't know, and paste. Let's see, and the other one is going to be called the same thing but with right. Paste, and well, just for actually to give it a proper name, let's say paste as well. Okay, so this is how you specify a group that is, you're going to give it this name and it contains these two ROIs. Sorry, I should just change this to 4. Sorry, all right, I don't know, my brain. Okay, so you are defining this as a new group ROI, and you are defining these two that should be joined together. Does it make sense, the syntax for the ROI groups field?
Mm-hmm.
If you have like multiple groups, you would just continue this thing with another name, right? You would say, well, whatever new group was in there, and then the new ROI here, and then the new ROI that you want to also put into the new group, and so on. But in this case, we only have 2 ROIs, so there are not that many groups that we can create. But this is basically the syntax.
So for the ones you're combining, they first have to be listed under ROIs, and then.
Well, no, this is basically the names. In here, you should have basically the list of ROI names, and those could be, if you are using this type of nifty files that contain just a single ROI, then the name is actually the name of the file. But if you are using some of these Atlas ROIs that contain multiple regions within them, then the names are the names that appear in the list, the text file that contains the list of the names, right? So you could have, like, I don't know, ventral motor cortex and posterior motor cortex, whatever ROIs are defined within an Atlas ROI. And in here, you would enter those names. And if, let me see, if you have defined ROIs using subject-specific syntax, where the ROIs are defined at when you are doing the import, remember in the configuration file for a subject-specific where you can enter ROIs and give them a name, those names that you are giving them at that step are the names that you will have to put in here. Basically, these are the same names that when you do the analysis without any sort of combination will appear listed in the display. You see the display where the bars, and you see a bar with an error bar for every individual region and for every effect that you are looking at. Those regions have names. Those names are listed in those displays as for every individual bar. So those things that appear listed there are the ROI names that you should enter here when you want to combine them. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that is basically the syntax, and let's actually give it a try. I haven't actually run this, so I want to see whether it actually works, or it might actually. Let me see if I can. Let's push it up a little bit. No, I can't. Can you move my screen so I can see a little bit below this? Thank you. That's fine. Let's see. Now, the one that I saved here, we should be able to just run that and see. Okay, no, this is still showing right and left, so I did something wrong.
There was a warning, like something not found, I think, in the command.
Let's look at inspected file mode. That's fine. Loading if left groups, ROI groups, folder ROI keys. This is fine. That's fine. It is sense that these names are not found. So yeah, right. So it's not finding these names. Let me see why it's not finding this name. Actually, I should have looked at that display because that would have told me the actual names, how they show up in there. Let me just look at the names that are listed here. Left cerebellum. That looks right. Why is it's not what I typed? Radius. Let me see.
Yeah, that's the right radius.
Huh. Okay, that's weird. Let me just quickly check then. This is in no, not that one. Sorry. So it's in. Well, let me actually look at my computer for a second. ROI results, and the line is okay. 167. But why is not showing? Because it was okay. Take a stop in run ROI. Run ROI. Nope. Yeah. Run results. Sorry, but this 167. Let's do it again. That's fine. Oops. And this is the one that is not fine. So let's check. What are my names? ROI names. It's because it's why is sorry about that. Why is a list of cell array instead of string?
It should be ROI names, not RIO.
Right, these are ROI names, but the problem is that I want to make sure that this is fine. Oh, it's because it's one for every. I think that maybe in ROI names is one for every region. No, it should be one for every new region. Let me see, I'm missing something here. ROI names. Let's see. Let me see. Oops. Okay, sorry. I'll fix it in my computer and I'll upload it. And I'm supposed to try to change it there. This is fMap 17. Where are you? Here it is. Okay, let's try. And then what is my window here? Let's make sure that it uploads the last version. ROI results. Yep. Okay. No, it still gives me the same warnings, right? Yes. Oh, right. Okay, right. Sorry about that. Let me upload it again. And try again. Oops, sorry. Well, that's fine. Okay, now we're getting closer. Sorry. And it's complaining about
Sorry, guys. I rewrote my analysis with the corrected, like stuttering ROI.
Oh yeah.
It's a nice tool.
Yeah.
that's the same thing.
Yeah, if anything, it looked like it trending in the opposite direction.
Yeah, we decided not to include that.
Right. Okay, let me try again. Okay, I'll debug it later. Sorry, I'm taking too much of your time. I'll debug it later. Sorry about this. I thought it was just a quick fix, but I don't seem to be thinking right. So I don't know. After the meeting, I'll send you a quick note when this is ready to try. But the syntax is just that. It's only that I'm having trouble with. I don't know how the list of ROI names come in the place, because sometimes you have the case where you have defined multiple regions, multiple ROI files, and each ROI file has a subset of ROIs on themselves, right? So you have this hierarchical structure of ROIs, and then within each ROI you can have multiple ROIs. And I wasn't dealing with that hierarchical structure correctly, so I'll fix that, and I'll send you a mail when that works. But the syntax of your config file should be that. So I don't know if you. When I send you an email, try it again, and if you run it still into an issue, let me know.
That sounds good.
I can send you the error that I got here for the second level one.
Oh, right, or share the window if you want.
Yeah, I don't know if I can share the window, but I also don't know if it's easier to send it.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, let me share and you can see. So it looks like the problem is there is a second level analyses information in there, but the problem is that it's after the error occurs. So, sorry, give me 1 second. I have another question. This is not the right one.
Right, so we are.
So the error occurs at line 197.
Right.
And then second level analyses.
Okay, but it should be right now. We'll probably.
Yeah, I can use control, that's easier.
Yeah, let me take control for a second, and I think we might be just in the. Okay, so where are we? We are SPM, DBApp, ComModule GM, DBApp, ComModule. This one should be it. Oh no, DBApp still that one. Okay, so second level. No. Analysis type is called here. Okay, analysis type 1. 1 is not the one. Okay, DBApp then. Huh. Why are we here? We shouldn't be here. Let me see. Oh yeah, we should be here. No, it's only that the options should have something else, right? Let me see. Options. Options doesn't have anything. Let me see, where are we coming from? Oh. What line did you run then? Did you run this? Whoops, sorry. Let me just. Sorry. I think for some reason, yeah. Okay, do it quit again. Do it quit. Wow, we are in a nested.
Do you want me to do quit debugging?
Yeah, let me just do it quick until we, well, there we go. Okay, so the land that you run, okay, so you were actually trying to run the second level analysis, the normal one. You need to run the ROI ones.
Because I had the new pre-processing, so I was starting with that.
Right, but you cannot run the normal second level analysis. The fix for the ROI stuff is that now it allows you to run the second level .ROI thing without actually having run before the second level stuff.
Oh.
Because the second level assumes voxel level stuff, and it's only going to work when you all of the things in the same space. Now you can actually run the second level ROI analysis without having run the second level original analysis, and it will run the kind of like subset of versions that it needs only for ROI analysis.
Oh, that's great.
So you basically need to run this and then add in the ROI information, which I don't see.
It's who knows what I did. Let's see. And I know this is not the smart way to do it, but that's what I did right now.
That's fine.
So
Yeah, the only problem with listing them explicitly as in there is that. Sorry.
It should work.
There's no judging.
Okay, well, that's already better. There's much less things that are missing in some of them.
Right. I think currently we are for missing data. I think currently we are just putting everything to zeros, but we could like do something smarter, but I don't know if it's better. So what do you think it would make more sense to do when you have missing ROI data within a group? I mean, this doesn't apply here. I'm just mixing the two things that we were talking about. So the grouping stuff that we were talking about for ROI level analysis and the thing that I was looking at missing results in here. When you define a group, currently the second level analysis are going to treat the individual regions that have missing data as having zeros, and it's still going to group them by computing the average. But we could potentially change that and just compute the average across whatever subset of sub-regions actually have valid data as opposed to missing data.
I think that makes more sense if it's averaging in those zeros because...
Right, because averaging those zeros, I mean, yeah, it's not ideal, but it's in the same way that it's not ideal that currently we are just treating missing data as zeros, which is also not ideal in a way.
I think we may need to wait for Jason on this one because I'm still not sure. My understanding was the areas that we're interested in, these subjects shouldn't have missing data. So I think I need to retouch base with Jason because most
just to check whether I mean I think the main reason why you had a lot of missing data was because you were running the analysis on the M&I space using the M&I space functional data, and since the regions were defined on the subject level, they expected your data to be in subject space because they were defined from free surfer.
This is with the free surfer pipeline.
Right, but this one should have fixed that. So now you shouldn't see all of those missing data. So if you're still seeing some missing data, let's figure out why that is happening, because that shouldn't be the case. Or at least not for common ROIs, right? It might be missing ROI.
Yeah, like VPMC, that should be missing.
Right, exactly. So okay, so let's figure that out, and then we will. I mean, at least the second level analysis are running, which is fine. I mean, this is
great. So
right. This is what we were aiming for. Let's look at the missing data just to figure out why that is happening. Whether it's a problem with the pipeline itself, or there's something with the data, or with the way that we are correlating the ROI information to the functional data, and then we will look at the ROI level results just to make sure that everything looks fine as what we would expect. Okay, do you have any other questions or things I would like to cover?
I have a general thing, unless anyone has specific stuff. So I'm putting together something annoying, but it's bringing up a lot of questions about just fMRI terminology. So I just was wondering if I could get sort of your input on a couple things that we will end up using in papers, but also it's very specific to what I'm doing right now. So specifically, if somebody asked you what was the fMRI acquisition matrix, what do you think that would be?
Acquisition metrics. Wow, that.
And I'm just trying to figure out, like, stuff may be big and that's fine, but like, I'm trying to make sure, like, if I don't understand it, I'm trying to make sure that it's like not like I just don't know the term, or it's really just that vague.
Right. This is a DICOM specific field name, because I'm not entirely sure what it's supposed to mean. I could look it up, but
Okay. No. If you don't know what it's supposed to mean, then I'm going to go with what I have, which is great because it's just a guess. But the one that I do have an actual question about, because that one I wasn't sure, is how do you calculate the image resolution?
The image resolution, right? That typically is. Let me see if I can share my screen, because it's a formula.
Oh, great. That's my real question. The acquisition matrix, there was no examples for it, and so I'm just. I feel like it.
Where is my window?
I think I have to stop sharing.
Oh, right. Could be that. Okay. Sure. Okay. So, if what data do you have? Do you have at least well, perhaps that is the acquisition matrix. I wouldn't call it acquisition matrix, but do you have these metrics there when you have I don't know. Let me see if I have some nifty file in here. That one. But these metrics, this is I call typically, or I've seen this called the voxel to world mapping, and this is an affine transformation that defines how to transform voxels into MNI coordinates. Do you know what this metric is about, and do you know how?
No, I don't know.
Oh, okay. So that should be, let me see if you have it in the DICOMs as well. But if you have a nifty file, that basically this is the syntax to get it. You just load the syntax file, use SPM-Vol to get the header information from that file. And in the header information, it tells you some information. It tells you the dimensionality of the data. This is the number of dimensions basically for the X, Y, and Z dimensions. And then you have this, well, DT is the format of the data, where it's in integers or floats and things like that. P-info has to do with the scaling of the data, how it's scaled, the units. And then this mat file contains this 4x4 matrix. And when you have a dimension, let's say that I want to figure out where you have a three-dimensional matrix that has your data, right? And you can index every individual voxel by an index within that three-dimensional matrix. So I don't know, for example, 2, 3, 10 would be the indexes to the second voxel row, the third column, and the 10th, the C dimension. If you want to figure out what coordinates in millimeters that voxel has, this is the transformation that you apply to actually get the millimeter the coordinates in world space. If this file is in MNI space, those are in MNI space, and if this file is in subject space, then those coordinates are in millimeters within the scanner. But these are always millimeter space definition of your data, and this is how to transform coordinates in like voxel dimensions to actual space in millimeters, so location of that particular voxel. Okay, and I mentioned all of this because the actual resolution of the voxels is this thing. If you do this operation on this matrix, that gives you the resolution of each voxel. This is the X, Y, and Z. X, Y, and Z meaning if that is an MNI space, X is lateral, Y is anterior posterior dimension, and Z is inferior superior, and those are in millimeters units. So this formula, let me see if I make it bigger so that it's a little bit more visible. This formula is the one that you do to get the voxel resolution, basically the dimensions of your voxels. Does that make sense?
What's that fourth number?
The fourth, you don't care about that. Yeah, that's, I mean, typically, that was just not to simplify typically you would do this, but I wanted to make the formula a little bit simpler, but yeah.
So I see, so it's the square root.
The square is the norm of this vector. So basically you have this matrix and you have, well, this is, well, let's say that, let me see if I have some data that is in a different space.
I have some, because I'm doing it on raw data, so I can.
Right, exactly. You can do that with pretty much anything. Let me see, I think.
Difficult to match up. Everything is, yeah, this is ACE. So there is no clear answer for everything. Yeah, so Jason was confused about whether I was under the impression that the resolution was like the voxel size that it says on the top. And then he thought it also had maybe something to do with the spacing of the voxels. But
Oh.
I think that,
I just popped in too.
hi Jason.
Hey guys.
It's like you heard your name and then you were like, here I am.
You know, I think you did a good job of representing. I was worried when I heard my name come up. But yeah, the idea was, so I know that the voxel size, I believe the voxel size is 1 millimeter cubed. I'm 99% sure of that. But there's also a 50% gap between slices. So what my understanding is that the actual effective resolution there then is 1 by 1 by 1.5 rather than 1 by 1 by 1. The voxel size is 1 by 1 by 1, but the resolution is actually 1 by 1 by 1.5.
Right. Right, I see what you mean. This formula will give you what you call the effective resolution, because this is actually the distance between one voxel and the next voxel. Whatever, if that voxel is entirely covered by the actual acquisition or it has some gap, it doesn't care about this. At least this formula doesn't. So this is kind of like the effective resolution, which is the actual distance between one voxel and the neighboring voxel to the right and to the anterior direction and to the superior direction. That's what it's computing, basically.
How does so that this information is in the Nifty, it would be like in the unpacked Nifty file? Okay.
Right, this is in the Nifty file, and you can load it in many ways. If you load it with SPM, you can do something like that, just the SPM vol and then the file name. You can also do that from using FreeSurfer if you don't have SPM around, but I don't recall the syntax for that. But it's something about read Nifties or something like that. And it will also give you, this is in the header information, so it's very, and if you have the, let me see, in the DICOMs typically is, but I don't recall exactly where, but I could figure that out if you want. Do you have the Nifty files, or do you want to recover that from the DICOMs?
I have both, but I think the Nifties are a bit easier to load if it's there.
Right, the Nifty is simpler, and the DICOM to Nifty conversion took care of figuring out which one is the proper, how to read that, because it's a little bit more complex always, as always, stored in the DICOM files. So, yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. I just needed that one reality check, and then
no problem.
that's helpful. And yeah, so then when, just to translate over, like when we report that in papers, like this is the resolution. So that's
yeah, this is the voxel resolution, and typically if it's the same across all dimensions, you call it isotropic, and just say the number of this in millimeters. So this would be like 3 millimeter isotropic voxel dimensions and so on.
Thank you. Appreciate
no problem.
it.
Okay, other questions?
No.
I sent you an email last night regarding the PPI analysis in Khan. It doesn't have to do with FrankLab, but I just wanted to.
Oh, right, the GPPI stuff. What was the question originally? Let me remember. It was how to interpret the PPI components, or what was it?
Well, it's basically is PPI analysis unidirectional or bidirectional?
It's unidirectional, meaning that it does make a difference when you are using a region. So the effect between a seed and a target is not the same effect as between the target and the seed, because it's like a linear predictive model where, in addition to, so for every target you compute a different model. For every target ROI that you are trying to predict, basically you compute a model that combines a lot of effects into what is explaining that target activation. And it's trying, the GPPI model actually tries to explain that target ROI activation as a combination of the actual activation of the seed ROI and also the physiological effects, basically the task effects that you define, and any potential interaction between the task and the activation of the seed ROI. So you have those three things, which might be more than three if you have multiple task effects, if multiple conditions. So all of those things create like a design matrix with all of those effects that are trying all to predict the target ROI. And then from that prediction, you identify the interaction terms, which are the ones that you typically care about because they reflect how the connectivity between the seed and the target is changing with the presence of the condition, of one particular condition, or its absence, or something like that. Sorry, go ahead.
So the specific case is, so I ran these PPI analyses with seed ROIs. It's basically like 21 different seed ROIs from the speech lab ROIs, seed to voxel. and then finding these clusters that are significantly different either between groups or between conditions within a group. And so when I find a significant result, so there were a bunch of seed ROIs that all pointed to clusters that were all significantly different between two different conditions, or rather the connectivity between that seed ROI and a bunch of clusters in the same area or the relationship was different across the different conditions. Sorry, I feel like I'm confusing everything here right now.
So you are testing so you are running an analysis that is looking at the difference between the two conditions in the GPPI effects, and you are combining multiple ROI seeds, right? Is that what you're doing?
No. So looking at a bunch of ROIs separately. So the seed to voxel analyses.
Okay, so you're looking at seed to voxel analysis for every individual, so for one particular seed region, and the analysis that you are looking at the second level, is it a comparison across conditions, or what is it?
Yes, it's a comparison across two different conditions.
Okay,
rhythmic speech and normal speech.
Okay, so you are comparing, so you are trying to look at whether the connectivity between that particular seed region that you care as a speech area and the rest of the brain actually shows different patterns of connectivity between the two conditions when the person is, what are the two conditions actually, like a speech versus baseline, or is it more like different types of speech, or what is it?
So yeah, there's two different types of speech, rhythmic speech and normal speech.
Okay, so you are looking at the connectivity patterns with one particular region of interest, like a speech region, and where those connectivity patterns are different in regular speech versus rhythmic speech. Right?
Yes, except I ran this on 21 different seed ROI.
Right.
Separately.
Right, so you get like 21 ROI seed to voxel results that are showing you for every individual seed region or that you care whether the connectivity between that region and the rest of the brain shows any particular difference between the two conditions, right? And then you run the combined analysis using all of those 21 together, or you didn't?
I did an FDR correction across all clusters from each of those ROIs. So
okay, that looks fine as well. So yeah, so then you are correcting already for the fact that you are running like 21 analysis.
Exactly.
Okay, perfect.
And so, sorry.
Sorry, no, the question is about interpretation of the results, or what is it?
Yes. So so 4 of those seed ROIs showed reduced connectivity in one condition compared to the other. They all showed it in the same sort of anterior middle frontal gyrus area. And so in order to interpret what that means, so there's a couple ways that we could do it depending on what we can actually glean from this type of analysis. So it sounds to me like if it's more of an effective connectivity kind of issue, then we can only say that their difference between these two conditions is in the amount that the activity in the seed regions has on activity in these clusters that are very close to one another in anterior middle frontal gyrus. But it would be also interesting if the activity in middle frontal gyrus, if the connectivity between that anterior middle frontal gyrus area and these areas of the speech network, if in general there's like less coupling during one condition rather than in another condition. Right. But I just want to make sure that we can interpret.
Right. I mean, so what you're asking basically is, even though the analysis, the GPPI are not really bidirectional, can I interpret the results as if they were bidirectional, or is there a way to actually test where the opposite direction of the effect actually exists, right?
Yes.
Right. So the analyses are not bidirectional, but in practice, most people just use those GPPI analysis to talk about connectivity between two regions, and they don't care much about the actual directionality of the effect, even though the analysis actually forces a directionality, but that's just like I don't know. Is taken as a limitation of the analysis itself, the fact that it's not bidirectional other than as a usage guide. So people use it to talk about bidirectional effects anyway. But you could actually test it. I mean, you could, the fact that it's not showing in the opposite direction is because you are just because you are not testing for it. There might be, or it might have different like power, because it might be, I don't know, you could just define a region as the roughly located in the position of that intersection of all of those clusters. And then use that as an additional seed area for GPPI analysis. So look at for a potential connectivity difference between the two conditions when looking at the connectivity between this particular region and everywhere in the brain, and look at whether those analyses show effects in the regions, speech regions that actually show the opposite effect, right? And that should help you identify whether the effect that you're looking is directional and gives you a little bit more bias to, or a little bit more of a reason to actually talk about those results in terms of bidirectional connectivity effects rather than the effect that one region has on another as an effective connectivity type of thing.
Okay, that's I was thinking that.
Right, that would be like the very formal and explicit and very serious way of doing it. But in practice, many people when you actually look at the results of people that have been using GPP analysis, they don't, when they go to interpretation, they generally talk about the interpretation in terms of connectivity. And they don't explicitly make a case about the direction of those connectivity effects. Okay. That might be because in practice, you have this dual effect. When you find it in one direction, it's also typically the case that it also shows up in the other one. But at least, so it could be more of a practicing. But mathematically, it's not necessarily that it does happen. That it's not equivalent. It's not like when you do like a varied correlation, that if you find a correlation in one direction, that is exactly the same mathematically as the correlation in the other direction. Gotcha. In this case, they are not exactly the same, but in practice, they might be effectively very similar, and that's why people don't care that much about the direction of the effects.
Okay. Yes, because I mean, there's sort of two different ways to interpret the results if they're unidirectional in one direction versus unidirectional in another direction. Right. And so I think if there's ambiguity, then we can kind of put both as potential reasons and also run this like post hoc analysis to potentially see if like that where using the seed region using that area of prefrontal cortex as the seed region and seeing where.
Right. In practical terms, I mean, people have been frowning upon trying to make too many inferences regarding the directionality of an effect from functional data, just because you don't have the temporal resolution to be able to discriminate whether one region is affecting another one or whether the other one is affecting one. I mean, there are all of these sophisticated models like SEM and DCM and all of those and a little bit like GPPI that try to take that into account and try to actually, well, formalize at least a model that mathematically it tries to extract the information in a directional way, so differentiate between the effect between one region and the other. But in practice, it's still not, at least I'm not totally fully convinced that you can actually get that information from the data, just because the data is very smooth in the temporal dimension, meaning that we are looking at very low frequency stuff and slowly varying activation. You cannot really tell whether one thing precedes another one in time. And because of that, it's very difficult to make a case that the activation is actually, the effect is actually happening in one direction as opposed to the other one. You need some additional information lacking this temporal precedence effect. So I don't know. In general, I wouldn't try to put much weight into the direction of the effect that you find, even if you find it in one of these directional analyses like GPPI, for example.
Gotcha. Okay, that is very helpful.
No problem.
Thank you. Oh, and just one quick follow-up for that. Sorry to everybody else. If I were to run sort of the backwards analysis, where taking that target region, make it the new seed, and then do a seed to voxel comparison, do I need to worry about anything in terms of correcting for multiple comparisons, or can I just as a priori?
Right. The whole analysis is going to be double dipping anyway, because the definition of the target region already comes from an original analysis. So you shouldn't trust the statistics of that result. This is mostly to help you with interpretation. But just the statistics of the results are going to be biased, because to properly do it without any sort of biases, because the problem right now is that you're defining the target region as a result of the same data analyzed in one direction. And even though they are not necessarily the bidirectional data analysis, they are related. So if you find an effect in one direction, it's most likely that you're going to find the same effect in the other direction. So if you define that region because of the effect in one direction, you are already biasing your results to be positive because of that. And that bias can be only reduced if you do some sort of cross-validation. So you could run, instead of one analysis to get a target region, to run n analysis, one for every individual subject, and to remove one subject data and define the region in a probabilistic manner, like using leave one out cross-validation. But that is just an excessive amount of work for the purposes of you just want the interpretation, right? Just want to know whether you want to interpret this thing as a bidirectional thing or not. And for that interpretation purposes, you can just say, well, I'm going to run this post-hoc analysis. Post-hoc analysis are going to be biased because this is the nature of a post-hoc analysis. You're running that analysis because of the results that you just saw. So don't pay too much attention to the significance, just to get a sense in terms of the interpretation of whether I'm actually seeing an effect when I run this analysis in the same seed regions that I care about in that. And if I do, I will mostly focus on the interpretation having to do with bidirectional effects. Or if you don't see anything at all, even though these analyses are somehow biased into CU, then yes, perhaps the effect is, at least you have a little bit more reason to talk about your effect in terms of the direction of the effects rather than the bidirectional effects. But for that type of interpretation thing is why post-hoc analyses are invented, and why they don't. You typically, when you are running this post-hoc analysis, you don't care that much about the p-values and the statistics of it, because you're not trying to get a confirmatory answer to your question. You're just trying to help you to get the proper interpretation.
Okay.
So I don't know, if you want to do the long and precise way, then cross-validation is the way to do it, but I don't think that it would be necessary for these purposes. This is just
that sounds good.
Right. If I'm reviewing a paper and you tell me that this is a post-hoc analysis and you bias your interpretation, well, you base your interpretation based on the results of this, I would be perfectly fine with that. I wouldn't think this double dipping has any trouble.
Okay. All right.
No problem.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
I have a very naive question concerning the way that the results of the second level ROI analyses are displayed.
Mm-hmm.
So for some of the analyses, let's see here. 1 second. Yeah, this is the result of analysis I did on the stuttering trait nodes, and this is speech minus baseline, looking to see if there's like a group difference. And like for some of these ROI analyses, such as this one, the results are displayed in a way that it plots each group separately, whereas and like another example would be like even like when I did like the subcortical DIVA ones, it plots each group separately. But then like for this one, when I do for this contrast, it seems as though it's just taking the difference between the two groups. And I'm just curious, like, why is there that difference?
Right. So you are doing right. So in this case, let me see if I understand this correctly. When you're looking at these results, you're looking at the difference between conditions, the illegal novel minus illegal learned, and you are looking at one sample to test across those, right? So you're looking at the average of that effect across all subjects. And you are wondering why don't you see like the separate effect within novel learned versus the illegal learned and the illegal novel effects?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that I'm interpreting.
Right. I mean, in fact, you should. I mean, the code is designed to actually show you those individual effects separately, as long as you are entering them separately into your contrast, right? I mean, this has to do with the kind of like a redundancy or alternative different ways that you can specify your second level analysis. You can, for example, when you care about the difference between two conditions, you could create those difference between conditions as a contrast at the first level, and then enter those contrasts that already look at the difference between the two conditions in a second level analysis as entering a single unique condition for every second level analysis. Or you could enter the contrast separately for the illegal novel in one case and illegal learned in the other case, and enter two contrasts and then entering a -1,1 between conditions contrast in the second level analysis. And those are two versions of running the analysis will give you precisely the same results, exactly the same statistics here. When you look at the t-values and the uncorrected p-values and the FDR corrected p-values, all of those will be exactly the same, whether you run it one way or the other, but the plot will be different. If you run the analysis using the second way, the latter way, the one where you actually enter the two conditions and specify between condition contrast, you should see two bar plots here, one per condition. While if you do it the former way, basically just by entering a single condition, which already has computed the combination of the two conditions at the first level, then you will only see one display here that shows you the difference between the two. So do you have the config file, just to double check, do you have the config file when you run this analysis for the second level config file?
Sure.
And also just to ask a clarifying question, is this, are the two bar plots that you're seeing in some of those analyses are each grouped separately, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then
so here's like, this is the,
Right there.
so this is the speech
it's
minus,
an effective group.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, gotcha.
hold on. So this one is speech minus baseline, and this
Right.
is the one that is generating
Perfect.
this type of plot.
Right. So,
And then I mean they're the same. I think, right?
Yeah.
Oops,
Yes.
sorry. Wrong one. Speech minus baseline, and then the other contrast.
Yeah, so the question is about the group difference.
right. No, but it says, oh, but the group difference. Oh, I see what you mean. You are still, you're still looking at running a group difference in here, right? So you're not asking the question why you are not seeing different separately. Basically, the illegal novel. Could you? That's weird.
See at the top it says group, illegal novel, illegal.
Yeah.
So you must have had group in there at some point versus
Right.
agent control, because otherwise it wouldn't.
Right, exactly. It says group, so basically it's likely that you enter. Oh, right. You might have entered. Right, but let me see. You might have entered the all subjects group as opposed to.
Because if you had, instead of specifying two different like regressors, one for control and one for patient,
Right.
and that you had done one that was just a group regressor.
Right, exactly. I think the issue here is basically is different than what I was talking about then. Let me just, yeah, it's probably this analysis had something that contained the all subjects and group as opposed to the controls and patients covariates, right? So you have like, you enter like all subjects and group and then look at the 0-1 contrast for that as opposed to.
If you can't find it, we can possibly just run it both ways and then you can see that.
Right, exactly. So this, let me see, what is this? So the same thing should happen if you enter in here instead of in this design that we are looking at, this configuration file. If you instead of entering control and patient and entering a 1-1, you enter all subjects and group and then a 0-1 contrast. You are still looking at the difference between the two groups. It's only that you are only going to see one plot in the results.
And I think it would help also to run the one where there is two separate groups, just to make sure
Right.
that's actually outputting what we expect.
Right. Do you have the config file for that thing, that the display that you were showing us?
Well, if you do save as here instead of overwriting it, then you'll have both versions.
Like this?
Yeah.
Sorry, I know you guys can't see it. Okay, so this is.
Oh yeah, because that would be the contrast between would just be the one group regressor.
Right, exactly. So if you do this, you will get just one bar plot for the group effect, basically. And the group effect is actually measuring the difference between the two groups, but you will only see one bar plot, basically, for every region. While if you do it the other way, the controls and patients, and then enter a 1-1, you will see two plots. And the rule that the actual script is doing to figure out what to display for you is looking at the contrast that you specify and looking at which elements have non-zero values, and it's displaying you one plot for every element that has a non-zero value in your contrast specification. So if you enter two conditions and you enter a 1-1, it's going to show you the two conditions separately. If you enter like a two groups and a 1-1, again, it's going to show you the two groups different. While if you're doing a regression analysis, when you enter all subjects, which is a constant, and then, I don't know, age, for example, which is the correlation with age, and then a 0-1 contrast for that, then that is going to show you only the age effect. It's not going to show you something for the one that you assign a 0, basically for the element that you assign a 0. So I think that explains why these results are only going to show you one effect, but that effect is actually going to compute the difference is showing you the difference between the patients and controls, only the size of that difference. But for interpretation purposes, I typically find the other plot a little bit more informative because in addition to telling you whether one group is higher than the other, it tells you whether one group is positive and the other is not, or whether the one is negative and the other is 0. So even if you find the same sign of the difference between an effective activation differences between two groups, you really want to know what was the activation within the two groups separately to be able to better interpret what that means, right? You don't only care about whether the difference is positive or negative. You only care about whether the original activation was positive or negative or null within each group separately. So I typically would recommend to use the other syntax for display purposes, but this basically explains why you see one bar plot instead of two. And the only thing to check is that the statistics should be exactly the same. So what you're seeing here below in the ROI list and T values and P and corrective values, PSDR, that should be exactly the same as what you would get if instead of running that version, you run the original one that has control on patients and 1-1 contrast between those.
So if you keep this results up,
right,
that
keep
window
this window, don't close this window, and then change the syntax.
Control and patient listed separately, and then
right.
You should be able to see what we would expect that instead of one plot per ROI, we could get 2 plots, one for each.
Right, and depending of what the sign of the groups thing, it might be like a -1-1 or a 1-1 contrast. So we might get the effect reversed or not, depending on whether. But yeah, that will give us. This is just will change whether the statistics will be positive or negative, but the plot will be the same basically. So it's a 50% chance of getting it right.
Make sure you want control minus patient as the contrast. See.
That's what this is. Though,
Oh
right?
no, this is
control minus patient.
Yes.
That's weird. That should show you.
Yeah, so that is weird.
Did you save the config file, and are you sure to be pointing to that same thing? Let's just to double check the basics for. So we're looking at second level speech baseline. Speech baseline group comparison. That's weird.
Like someone to know that config file is.
Could it be because it's just showing it's not rerunning the analysis, right? Because yeah, I think it's that what was the field that there was one way to force the overriding of the second level analysis when it's running this, because it's I think that might be it. This is still reading the information from whatever configuration file was created first. That might be the issue.
I think the name at the top is just what the second level analysis file is called.
Yeah.
So the group is just from the name of the file.
I see. Yeah, it's not.
It's not. Yeah, it's not pulling it from something.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Phew.
So yeah. Yeah, so that's weird.
Yeah. So try just so just for debugging purposes, try rerunning the actual second level analysis. So run the syntax FL, the same thing but without the ROI.ROI. So just FL second level, yeah, that thing, and remove the last entry because that's the ROI configuration thing.
Oh, that's
Wait, I think it might be a different file name. I think it's a.
Oh, really? Speech baseline group comparison.
I think you might have put the wrong.
It might be, let me see, speech baseline group comparison,
Yeah,
and this one is called
ROI syntax before. If you change your second level configuration file, and then you run the .ROI without running it without that .ROI instead of just running second level, then it'll just take what you've already run.
Oh.
So you need to rerun every time you change the configuration file.
Okay.
You need to rerun the original, like just second level analysis. Because if you do second level .ROI, it just brings up what you've already run.
Okay.
Yeah, so the second level .ROI syntax basically takes the analysis that you run if they exist, and just reruns them basically only within the ROI. So basically groups the data in a different way, because those analyses have been performed separately for every voxel. You want to then group those voxels into regions, but it depends on that second level analysis having been run, and it depends a little bit on, requires some of that. So basically, if you change anything in the configuration file, you still need to run the second level analysis, I think, to be able to, for that difference to show up.
Well,
I mean, if you change the ROI configuration file, that's fine. That is only used by the ROI level analysis. But if you change something in the configuration file of the second level analysis, then you need to rerun that step. And that applies to basically any configuration file. If you change something in the configuration file that is a preprocessing step configuration file, you need to rerun from that step onwards, right? So rerun preprocessing, and then if you change something in the first level analysis configuration file, then you are going to need to rerun anything that goes from first level and on, and so on.
Thank you.
Ta-da!
Yeah.
Okay, there you go. Fantastic. So now you see 2, and it should be control and patience.
Our numbers are still the same.
Yeah, that's.
And that should be identical to the previous one, right?
Oh, thank you so much.
No problem. Yeah, we figured it out.
Yeah, but yeah, because I was like, I'm pretty sure this was set up properly. Yeah. Okay.
And it's the same thing for the vertex voxel-wise. If you just use the dot plot, then it'll, if you have second level dot plot, then it'll just use what you've already run. But if you change your configuration file, you need to run just the second level.
Makes sense. Oh, thank you so much. So you'll just send us a note notifying us when the ROI grouping.
Yeah, the ROI grouping. Sorry about that. I thought the debugging is going to be much straightforward, but I don't know why. I didn't want you to look at me failing too many times in a row.
No,
I'll do it in the background. I'll send you the fix.
No, I really appreciate that you added that feature.
No problem. Yeah, that is going to save us some time, because otherwise we will have to create a new ROI for every combination that you will want to do and rerun the second level analysis, which is painful, basically. So and it was relatively straightforward. So I'll send you a note in a few minutes when I fix it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, or we should call it a day then?
Good.
I don't think we've got anything else for now.
Jason, I found a file called acquisition matrix in the DICOM header.
And what was that information? I was wondering.
It says, like, for example, for sparse sampling, it's 64 times 64.
Right. So it's the actual
64, 0, 0, 64, but it's 64 times.
Right. So it's the kind of like the size of every individual plane in terms like the dimensions in voxels, basically for every slice, right?
For most of the sequence names, they also have they also have that number in the sequence name. So clearly, it's like a bigger picture sort of thing. So.
It's right. So it should be the number of voxels in every
individual slice, right?
In this slice. I think oftentimes people do 64 by 64 by 48 or 32, whatever the number of slices are. Yeah. Also, so it's the number of voxels in the volume collected.
Yeah, but it looks like all of their terminologies are straight from the same ones the DICOM header uses.
Okay.
Also that FOTEM thing, I found that also. So I'm just going with what's in there.
And does that seem to be moving along?
Oh yeah, that'll be done today.
Awesome. That's fantastic.
Yes. All right, thank you.
All right. See you guys later.
Okay, see you guys. Bye.